Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tastemakers podcast. I'm your host, Taran Armstrong, and I am joined today by my co-host, Grace Leeder. How you doing, Grace?
I'm doing well. I'm full. I had a delightful meal of bear this week, Taran, so I'm quite full.
You ate a lot of bear.
I ate a lot of bear. Yes, I had a lot.
I also did my best to eat as much bear as I could. We'll talk about how it tasted, I guess.
I also ate a lot of dark matter this week. I don't know if that goes well with bears, but here we are. Yeah.
Seems like a strange combination. We are, of course, here to talk about the world of television and film and discuss the latest in the discussions surrounding these things, the news, and talk about what shows we've been watching, what we recommend that you guys watch. So let's go through. Obviously, there's some shows we need to check in on that are currently airing. We are going to talk about a bit about The Bear. Again, no spoilers for any of this, just kind of like getting you caught up to speed, getting a sense of where we stand on The Bear. And then there's also been a few movies that dropped this weekend that we were talking about that are maybe interesting to check in on. So we've got some things to talk through here, Grace.
Yeah, it's busy. It's a busy week. A lot of shows in the middle of their run between The Boys, The Acolyte, House of the Dragon, obviously, as we're covering. I'm still checking out Presumed Innocent, Interview with the Vampires on. There's a lot of ongoing television. The Bear dropped its full season. And then I spent about 4.5 hours at the movies this past weekend, Taran. So yeah, there's a lot to chat about.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's first, it's classic House of the Dragon check-in here. Not a ton of new info here. No new I don't think there are any new ratings for the show, which is maybe not the best sign in the world. I'm not sure, but I haven't seen any official ratings drops since the first episode. We talked about this after the episode aired that we still liked the third episode. It was still good, but maybe a couple of squabbles with it. And that's basically the response I've seen, that there's kind of like a back and forth happening, like, oh, that was kind of stupid, versus like, oh, get over it, it's fine. And I think that kind of pairs well with what we saw in the first season. So I think overall still going pretty well, but definitely maybe a little bit of a hiccup in the third episode.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm going to talk about a movie later that I think probably should be a TV show. And I feel like my complaint about House of the Dragon is there's these moments in it that are like very clearly designed to be like, this will be a TV moment, that I do not think are landing. And that's basically my complaint, is some of the like decisions on how to execute on some of the moments of the show that I think are lacking. And actually, if they could, because the content within them is very strong, I think. And so for the most part, I think Game of Thrones is doing what it's doing. I believe Josh Wigler, I did not say this on the recap last night, but I believe Josh Wigler, so Josh had asked the two of us if we wanted to know what the general vibe of some of the episodes that he had watched. He was not going to spoil us, but he was like, do you want to? And Taran, you said, no, thank you, I would not like to know. I then met separately with Josh, who was like, for another reason, I was like, yeah, please tell me what the vibes of the show are. I'm like totally happy to know this information. And then I believe it's episode 3, he said, it feels more Game of Thronesy than I think anything on the show has before. I don't know if after the episode, I think that that's true or not, but I kind of see what he means. And that's, I think the episode last night was very good. I think the season so far has been very strong. But yeah, alas, not much new. I think if you're watching it, you probably know what's going on. I don't think there's if you've been like, I don't think I need to check that out. I don't know if I have a strong inclination to be like, you gotta be watching this show.
Yeah, I think I still would say the second season so far has been stronger than the first overall. Just in terms of like, I think watchability. I think it's maybe a little more accessible because it doesn't have the time skips that really turned people off in the first season. But yeah, I mean, overall, for me, it was a little bit of a dip. But on the other hand, bit of a surprise. Here I am, talking about The Acolyte and how it's getting review bombed and how that's annoying, but at the same time, I don't like it. I didn't think it was very good. But I was like, listen, it's certainly still relevant. I'm gonna keep up with it. Why not? I'll just throw it on in the background. And then comes in episode, I think it was episode 5.
Yeah, it is episode 5. There's some debate about whether 4 and 5 should have been one episode, because 4 was pretty weak, and then 5
was very weak to me.
And then 5 was pretty great, seemingly. A lot of people liked it. I really liked it. But whether or not it would have been more effective for it to be one episode, but I liked what we got in episode 5. So yeah, it was episode 5. Turn.
I mean, listen,
Night
if we're gonna
is the name of the episode.
yeah, if we're gonna talk about like what they could have done in previous episodes, like I'm fine with just getting rid of the first making them all one episode into the second episode. I watched the episode. I was like, I guess on the Tastemakers this week, I'll be able to be pleased to report that like the Acolyte actually did something well. It had, I would classify it, and I don't know if I would classify it as like a great episode necessarily, but solidly good, I think. And in reaching into the territory of great at times, it to me was like if you liked the prequel movies, I think that you will enjoy aspects of this episode because it has that same feel to me. That's like, it is still a bit corny ish at times, but like it's actually hitting hard and like not pulling its punches, which is something I really enjoy and really like. It still, again, had a couple of like, just like really moments for me. But honestly, like if you are a big Star Wars fan and you've been like, I don't even know if I can get through this, it actually might be worth watching to this point. Even if it's just in the background, just to like see some fun fighting and stuff.
I have a friend named DJ LaBelle Klein. He's also known as Troy. He is a Wandoff. Famously, that's where some people might know him from. I believe it's his hot take that all Star Wars is bad, and he loves Star Wars. But he's like, it's all kind of bad. It's all like, you look at like famously, Mark Hamill has been like, can you believe what George Lucas made me say on the show in these movies? Like, it's so bad. The dialogue is often so bad. I believe it's Harrison Ford who also like advocated to be like, no, I'm just gonna say I know instead of he wanted to say like, I love you too. It's like, yeah, one of the most famous lines is like not a George Lucas line. It's just like Harrison Ford being like, I'm not gonna say that badly written dialogue. I'm gonna make my own. So I would agree with you that I thought this was very fun. I also am not like, oh my gosh, it's the best thing I've ever seen on television. Like, no, but it's like within the Star Wars universe is very fun. I love that there's been always sort of this mythos about. I saw even an Instagram meme that was like, if you have a red lightsaber, that means you're bad. If you have blue, that means you're good. Is that right? Blue. And if you have purple, it's because you're Samuel Jackson. Yeah. And then this show is like, why don't they just all have a bunch of colors? And it was visually one of the cooler things I've ever seen in Star Wars. The episode is called Night. I mean, Star Wars might be some of the only people figuring out how to like light, the camera well for a nighttime scene. But the fight was really cool, and it has this reveal that the show teased, I believe, at the end of episode 1, that it sort of pays off, that I thought worked exceptionally well. And there's a really standout performance that I'm hesitant to say, and I almost think like I should be able to say, but I really won't, in case you've given up on the Acolyte and decide to go back at our urging so that you don't get sort of spoiled. But I think that performance is very fun and very good, and I'm excited. And I think that individual might have just like not saved his career, but like I feel like that's an exceptional 30 minutes of television that I think will do him wonders moving forward. So I really liked, I was fine with I sort of like my feeling of the Acolyte was kind of like, I was really intrigued by some of the stuff they set up. Then I felt like they didn't really execute on it well. And then this sort of like brings it back, and I'm hoping like it can have a really strong second half. And it's really interesting to think that like, if it does have sort of an exceptional last 3 episodes, I think it's an 8-episode arc, whether or not it sort of like saves itself. And also, on Instagram, all the people, or on Twitter, all the people who still want to hate on the show, singularly being proven that like they don't understand Star Wars at all. When people are like, no, did you not watch the prequels? Like they have explained all of the things that you were complaining about, specifically about the fact that Sith didn't exist. It's like, no, that's the whole point. Like they were around, and the Jedi just were too dumb to realize it. So I really enjoyed it. So I think it's just really interesting that it sort of like bounced back in such a spectacular way.
Yeah, I don't want to like overhype it because I think part of the reason I enjoyed the episode so much is that like in many ways the first 4 episodes lulled me into a false sense of like this show is
Yeah,
not
yeah, yeah.
good, and
Yeah.
then the 5th episode happened. I was like, they're
Yeah.
okay, this is better than I expected. And so that was nice. So we'll see where it goes from here. It could take a turn a corner and like be better. Personally, I doubt it. I think it'll probably lull back down. But I was pleasantly surprised. So that is the Acolyte.
Mhm.
And then honestly, speaking of shows that that I really like wasn't enjoying as much. I think I've briefly mentioned this before on this podcast, but I was very excited for The Sympathizer, which was on HBO, created by Park Chan-wook, who is one of my favorite directors. He did the Vengeance trilogy, meaning Old Boy, and then more recently did The Handmaid's Tale, which obviously was very good and very critically acclaimed. And so he did this show. He started to direct this show and then kind of like let some other people take over. I believe he did The Little Drummer Girl as well previously, which I thought was fine in terms of like comparing his shows to his movies. Like, I love his movies. His shows have been fine for me. But I was excited for this one, and I really liked the first episode. But then it really slowed down for me, and I ended up kind of like dropping off for a little while. I was watching other shows for this podcast, but I finally did catch up with this, the Sympathizer, and finished it. And I do want to say about it that like throughout most of watching it, I wasn't like super enjoying it. But when I finished watching it and thought about the ending, it really recontextualized a lot of what I had seen, and it's one of those shows or pieces of media, I guess, that like I honestly wouldn't recommend to anyone as like entertaining media. But I really personally ended up enjoying, and I think this more comes from like the story, the book it's based on, than anything else. And maybe I should read it, but like it felt like it gave me a perspective that I'm not accustomed to seeing. And I think that like if you can approach this show as a kind of like psychological character study on identity with like a little bit of spy thriller on the side, as opposed to a spy thriller that has a little bit of identity thing, you can kind of, I think, approach it from a better perspective than I did. But I ended up really enjoying it, and it made me think a lot, which I always enjoy. So if that sounds interesting to you, you could check it out. But it's certainly not something. Again, I think I could. I didn't really always enjoy the process of watching it. It was fine, but I'm happy that I did finish it. Is what I'll say.
Yeah, I think I watched the first 3 episodes, which I think are all the Park Chan-wook episodes that he directed, and then he left, which I want them to stop doing. I mean, I can't really comment on whether the quality dips at all after that, but it's like there is part of me that was like, I'll catch it later because he didn't direct the episodes. He also has a film coming out this year. I believe it's a Netflix drop that looks quite interesting. It's called Uprising, about it's also about like Japanese invasions of Korea, and like I believe it's like a Korean slave who breaks free and then gets revenge on his former master.
He's going back to his wheelhouse.
Yeah, I know.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so very, very interesting. It's slated to come out the end of 2024 on Netflix. So interesting. He sort of I guess had wanted to do this earlier, but he got delayed with The Sympathizer and then went back to it once he had finished The Sympathizer. But Sympathizer was really intriguing to me. I thought like the first 3 episodes were really interesting, and I do think part of it for me is maybe the thing where you said like the show made you think a lot, which is actually the thing that was like, this is gonna sound so bad, but was sort of the deterrent for me of like, there are sometimes shows, especially shows that are heavily subtitled, that I'm like, okay, like I'm sitting down and I'm watching the show, and I, covering TV the past few years, like I do feel like I do a good job of like, sitting down and watching TV, but there is a different mindset you have to get into with shows that are not only is the subtitle, but then also is like dealing in themes that are not familiar to me, and that should be more of a reason for me to check it out, but I've left it. But I will get back to the Sympathizer because I thought that the first two episodes were exceptional. It's such an interesting thing. If we didn't set it up when I think I don't even know if we've talked about the show at all, because we did some pilot episodes. And I think we maybe checked in with it then. I honestly can't remember, but
I don't think we've talked much about it. But yeah, basically but here's the thing. I think the way we would have set it up was probably the wrong way to set it up.
Oh, interesting.
It's ostensibly a spy thriller about the Vietnam War, where the main character is working with the United States government and like the Vietnamese that are allied with the U.S., but secretly
South Vietnam,
yes,
who are not communists. The North Vietnam are communists. That's who wins the war, and
right.
he has to flee. Yeah.
So, but secretly he is a communist. Secretly
right.
he is working with the North Vietnamese, and so there's like some double agent stuff going on, and there is a spy thriller plot. But this is what I think frustrated me when I was watching it. Because I didn't realize this until much later in the show, but the plot is not actually very important at all, and will not really drive your engagement of the show for that reason. Right. It's so much more about, I think, like the inner workings of the main character and the ways in which his identity is impacted by the situations he's put in, and the conflict between the North and the South Vietnamese, and capitalism and individualism versus collectivism, and the fact that he himself is half white, and so there's a lot going on there. That is, I think, really interesting, and it was like I knew it existed, but I didn't realize how much of a focus it was for the show. I was more thinking that the plot itself was going to be the driver, and so every time that wasn't driving for me, I was like, "This is what are we doing?" Like this is, but by the end, it really worked for me. But anyway.
Ozonde, who I really enjoyed him in the first episode. He plays sort of the main character. I was intrigued by what I saw of Robert Downey Jr., even if I didn't always love it. And then Sandra Oh is hanging out in there too, which I quite
see. That's the weird thing too. Robert Downey Jr. plays 4 different characters.
He plays like every like major American, is that right?
Yes, and so in a way, it's a comment on how Asians are often cast in multiple different roles in American productions, because they're just like, well, we can just reuse them. And in fact, that happens in the show itself. So it's like, oh well, here's like generic white guy playing these varying roles that are different aspects of like patriarchy and representative of American imperialism. So in that way, it was cool. And I was like, yeah, that's a cool sentiment. But in the show, it's kind of goofy, and wasn't quite working for me again until the end, where it was a little bit, where it just kind of worked better for me. And when I recontextualized how the show functions, and how it is more like from the perspective of the main character. So anyway, I'm
always intrigued by what people do in their sort of like first play after they've won an award, right? And he didn't know that he was going to win, like that he was going to win the Academy Award for Oppenheimer when he took this role, but like he did, and this is the first thing he's in since then. It's a very interesting choice to be in this HBO show. He's also executive producing a ton of stuff. And actually, we're probably not going to talk about it, but Sweet Tooth has just aired its third season. I have not checked it out. I think you've checked it out a bit. We did get a recommendation to watch it. He executive produced that show and the Perry Mason show that's on HBO. He's just sort of doing some. I don't think he's lined up to do anything else next. Lots of rumors that he's going to go play Iron Man again, which I think would be a bad choice, but he'd probably make a lot of money from it. But yeah, I'm just always so interested in like the next thing after you win, the award he's been trying to win for forever. So yeah.
Well, okay, let's talk about The Bear. Let's get into it. Season 3. Okay, so I will lead off by saying I'm not caught up with The Bear. Grace is. So we have two different kind of perspectives on this.
Yeah.
The reason I'm not caught up with The Bear is that I did start watching The Bear like early on in season 1, and kept trying to watch The Bear because I watched the first few episodes and I was like, this is, or I think I probably watched the first one or two, and I was like, yeah, maybe some other time. And then people kept telling me this show is so amazing after season 1 finished. Like, the show is so amazing. So like, I was like, okay, yeah, I'll definitely get back into it. And so I watched a couple more episodes, and I was like, I don't know, this show doesn't really feel like it's for me. And then season 2 dropped, and they're like, it's even more amazing. And I was like, fine, I'll go back to it again. But it just took me so long. And so, of course, for this podcast, I was like, I'll finally get back into it and catch up. And I finally finished the first season. And I think I understand now why there has been so much praise for the show. I think my experience with the first season was that it ends really, really strong. And it will make occasionally have some really strong moments, but like the individual episodes, at least for season 1 for me, weren't always hitting. And in fact, there were some really like goofy moments that I was kind of like, what am I even watching at this point? But going into season 2, which I did start, it felt more focused to me, and I was enjoying it a lot more. So that's kind of where I currently am with The Bear. But Grace, what has been your experience with it?
Yeah, so I mean, so the way I have watched the first 2 seasons of The Bear is not to watch it when it came out. It's actually a show that I heard really good things, and I kind of had the similar experience of trying to get into it and finding myself being like, yeah, okay. And what ended up happening is that both years it got it placed in Post Show Recap's top 10 TV shows of the year, and I would calculate the lists, and as I was watching things make it into the top 10, I would want the list to be a surprise for the co-hosts, so I would make sure I'd watched everything on the list. So at least one person on the podcast could say, yeah, I've seen The Bear, basically. So that's how I watched both seasons, was at the end of the year being like, oh yeah, it's going to be in the top 10. I should watch it. And I binged both seasons. I binged the season 3 basically from Thursday to Saturday. So over the course of 3 days, I watched all 10 episodes. I do think it's exceptional. I do think it's an interesting show, and Josh and Antonio are talking about The Bear. They do a sort of preview for season 3 on the weekend program, and then this last Saturday, Emily Fox joined them. Emily Fox works in sort of the food industry. She's a personal chef, and they talk about sort of the season overall a little bit, and mostly dive into the premiere, which is a very interesting episode of television. And they talked a lot about how maybe this is a show that is like better as a binge, even though I think that there is some feeling. I think we're probably in a bubble. I think if you're listening to a podcast, you want shows to have conversation about them and for that to be extended. And most of us, I think, want shows to drop in a weekly format. I don't know that everybody agrees with that, but I think in our bubble, that's the general sentiment. I do think the Bear works entirely better as a binge. I think it has sort of this momentum and style to it that I think sort of leads you into the next thing that I think is exceptional television. I think I'm in a little bit of a minority, and that I think actually season 3 is just as good, if not better, than the previous 2 seasons. And I think that is not the sentiment I'm seeing from people. I think that people feel like, even though there are exceptional episodes of this season, and I will sort of hint at them without spoiling them, which is I think episode 3 is a really strong episode of season 3. I think the Tina focused episode and the sugar focused episodes are which the show will do every once in a while. It will just like completely block out every other character and focus you in on one of the people in this cast, and those are the folks who get those episodes. And I think they're like some of the standouts of the show. I think that the general sentiment is that the rest of the show felt really wheel spinning. And it's actually really interesting to talk about in comparison to another show that's airing right now, which is The Boys, which has signaled that next season will be its last. And that I think you and I, and when you talked about it with Josh, agree that might actually be a boon to the show, in the sense that as much as it's felt wheel spinning, maybe it can finally start to put some things in motion to set up a finale of that show. The Bear has not announced that it's ending after next season, but it seems to be heavily rumored that next season will be the last season. but it's not announced. And I feel like people felt like literally the season ends, and it's not spoiled, with a to be continued. And it's not just a to be continued of that like episode story. It really does feel like a lot of what they're trying to say in season 3 is a setup for season 4, which I think has frustrated people immensely. My counterpoint to that is that this is intentional, and I think that the show is so well designed, and I think people will go back to season 3 and be like, actually look at how amazing it is. And it's fair that people are feeling the way that they're feeling, to say that like the show kind of all came out and they all digested they had too much bear, and they're like, and actually I don't even feel full, like it didn't give me everything I wanted, Taran. But I think that the show this season is about the opening of this restaurant that they did. The end of season 2, you'll see the combination is like designing the restaurant. They open the restaurant. Now we're fully, the restaurant is here and it's there. And I feel like the show wants us to live in what that feels like, to run a prestige restaurant that's trying to earn a Michelin star. And I think Antonio articulates this really well on the weekend program, as he does with many things, that I think this is an intentional sentiment of like feeling like when you're doing something, running a restaurant is doing a lot of the same thing over and over again. You're making the same food, you're doing it. And I think this is intentional to feel like, to be in that same world in the closest approximation you can get, which is watching them run a restaurant on TV and following these stories and feeling like, is it worth it? And that I can totally understand where people be like, that's not what I want. I don't run a restaurant. I just want to watch a TV show about people running a restaurant. But I feel like I'm feeling like I'm sober. It's like, it's art, everybody. It's like they want us to feel not great, I think, about the way it's working. And I think that there's this thing of like, when you run a restaurant, restaurants they're like some of the highest failure thing that you could, it's the highest risk thing you can do is to open a restaurant and have it succeed. And I feel like this idea of like, you just have to keep going at it and keep doing it and the same thing over and over again. I just feel like that's so intentional. Again, I can understand why it did not work for people, but I think it was like, it's really like, I think it's like a stunning and bold choice to create and formulate the season in this way. And maybe I'm wrong and they just don't have enough ideas and they're just waiting for season 4, but I don't know. We'll see, Taran.
It sounds like what you're saying is that it's like The Wire season 2.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Like, in the moment, you're like, what are we doing? Let's get back to the fun stuff. But it actually is really, when you look back at it, it's like, oh, that was actually a really good season of the show. It really set a lot of good things up.
Jess Sterling, who's a producer in the background, throwing tomatoes at me, which I'll use them in my in my dish. Jess, so thanks for throwing tomatoes at me.
I will do my best to catch up with the bear and give my thoughts, because I think I'm coming at it from a place of like not really even loving the show all that much in the first place. So I'm curious to see what my thoughts will be for season 3.
So I don't know where you are, but for me, the moment is there's an episode. There's 2 episodes from season 2 that people really love, and they're Fishes and Forks, and they come back to back. And I think that Fishes is what it is. It's not my favorite, and it's actually one of my least favorite of the show. People love that episode, so I feel like I'm like not vibing with people on the bear. Forks, however, I love Forks, and it's the moment I was like, this is great this is really, really great television. So I will be intrigued. For me, I definitely want to check in with you after you've watched Forks, because I think I talk about Succession. I would talk about the magic trick of that show is that these are awful people, but we love watching them. We're rooting for them. We feel empathy for them. I feel like Forks does a similar magic trick where suddenly I'm like, how is the show making me feel this way? Which I'm very excited for you to get to that point. And then the other thing that we just haven't talked about, I think the other controversy from season 3 has definitely been the season 3 premiere, which is basically like, I described it to you, I think, as a recap /vibe /dream sequence. Which I think, again, polarizing. It either really worked for people or it didn't work for people. And I think it's emblematic of everything people are saying, which is either like, oh my God, what a beautiful piece of art I just watched, or like, I didn't need a recap for the show I was like been waiting a year for. Imagine if you waited multiple years. The Bear is one of the few shows, Taran, that's like every June the show just pops up on our screens, and they did film a lot of season 4, or like some of season 4 as they were finishing season 3. So you'd presume season 4 will come out exactly a year from now too, which is sort of a rarity in this day and age.
My prediction is that I hate that episode and I think it's really boring. That's my prediction.
The season 3 premiere.
Yes.
I could see that. I could see that. I'm entirely good with you and I having completely different. If you're you're with the people who are like, it's not doing anything, it's pretentious, it's occasionally boring, and for me to be like, Taran, it's art, man. You just don't you don't understand, man.
The way you're describing it makes me think of like the Ted Lasso episode where the like assistant coach was like roaming the streets of
Beard
had a whole Beard had like a whole experience on the streets of like wherever, and I hated it. I was so bored.
I kind of hated that episode too, but that's
okay,
mostly because I was like, I think the most fun thing about Coach Beard, and I think this is a big Josh Wiglerism, is like, tell us less about Coach Beard and never open up that, never open him up. Like it's so funny that every once in a while he would say something that is like, that's so weird. I don't actually want to know more information.
Yeah, man, Ted Lasso. I didn't even finish the final.
Oh wow. I think the finale is worth it, but there's actually, and again, there's a particular episode in the last season. I believe it's called Windmills. It's an episode where they play in Amsterdam, and I love that episode. I love it, but yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. It just got way too long. Lost me. All right, let's talk about some movies that dropped this weekend.
Big movie weekend, Taran.
Yes. I have not seen them myself, but Grace has taken this bullet. She went and saw the movies. How were they?
Yeah, so I'll start with, in order. Inside Out 2 wins the box office again. I don't think
I had seen that one.
Of course. I don't think it's any surprise. I think it has the most appeal. I think that these other two movies are kind of niche in a way. It's like no surprise, Inside Out continues to dominate the box office. And actually, Taran is the first movie of 2024 to make $1 billion worldwide. And I think there are some movies that have. I think this is going to be a really big Disney year, Taran. I think between this, Deadpool and Wolverine, and Moana 2, I think all have a chance to make $1 billion. I think the other one, so funny when we talk about billion numbers, because the other one that I think is probably going to make $1 billion is Despicable Me 4. So those are the four movies that can make $1 billion. But Inside Out 2, congratulations, you've done $1 billion. I went first to watch with my father, who is a senior citizen, Horizon and American Saga Chapter 1. And I was like, Father, you a big Yellowstone fan? I feel like this is a full-on dad movie, except for the fact that it's 3 hours, and it is not playing at our local theater. We had to go about a 40-minute drive to go watch. So I actually, in totality, to watch Horizon, I spent almost 5 hours for the experience of Horizon.
I mean, listen, with 30 minutes of previews, which is pretty much the norm nowadays, I think you're over 5 hours.
Don't worry, we barely could find parking. We made it just in time for the movie to start, so it's fine. I think this is so interesting, and you know what? I asked my dad for it. I was like, Dad, what'd you think of the movie? And he was like, Yeah, I really liked it. I think my dad liked it more than me. My dad on the way home also. There were moments in the movie where I was like, that was really confusing. And then my dad would be like, why was that guy there? And I was like, yeah, no, I don't know. I think that they just like didn't include a scene. And it's funny in a 3 hour movie that I'm like, you cut out scenes of this movie.
3 hour part one movie.
Yes. Here's the thing about Horizon on American Saga Chapter 1. It is intended to be 4-part movie saga.
4?
Yes.
I thought it was
4
2
parts. No, he has filmed 2. He is, I believe, on the path to getting 3 done, and 4 he is working on. That is the thing. Wow. This movie is basically 3 1-hour movies. You do not see Kevin Costner, and just to say our expectations, you do not see Kevin Costner until a full hour into the movie, and you don't see Luke Wilson, who is part of the latter, until 2 hours into the movie. So this movie is set up in chunks, which I think is really interesting. All of it feels like television. Nobody's story is completed. There are fully characters who like they would never be in a movie, but they would be in the television show version of this thing. It is fully a television, but on the movie screen. And I do think it looks beautiful. It is, for what it's trying to do, it's basically, I heard this, it's every type of Western movie because it's 3 hours and then will be 4 movies. And I think that it's done almost as well as it can be, but I think that the like the gusto in which to try this makes almost no sense. First of all, it's 3 hours. It's then 4 movies. He left Yellowstone, which is the most watched television show ever, in which he probably just could have convinced Taylor Sheridan to like let him do this on television. And if he doesn't make his money back, which he only made about $11 million, I think only the domestic figures have been released. I don't even know if it's been released internationally yet. He needs to make way more than $11 million to get his money back on this movie. So I don't know. I think the movie was totally fine. It's like well made. I think Costner is really good, actually. At like he's been in this world for so long, like the movie industry and the Western, that he knows how to like block and shoot and make sure it all looks good. And I thought that there were like extended scenes of this movie that I thought were excellent. But there's a lot. There is so much going on that there is like a thing that happens at the beginning of the movie that then is very important at the end of the movie that I've heard my dad say. I've heard other people be like, who's that kid in the movie? And I'm like, oh, he's from that first scene in the movie, which is 3 hours earlier. So it like, I think that this is such a huge gambit that I don't think it quite makes sense. Oh, and the other piece I'm saying is that the next movie comes out in 6 weeks. And if you haven't seen that, if you didn't spend 3 hours to go watch this movie, then I don't think you're going to go watch the next one. So he's gambling so much, I think, on this such ambitious project that I think ultimately is a fine movie. But I just think in the world where like movie theaters are struggling, I don't really get it. But it's fine. My dad enjoyed the movie, and it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, like, is there a reason to see this over like a Sergio Leone film? Like, because like I don't even know if I would go to see like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in theaters if I didn't know it. Like these are long movies,
Yeah,
I love that movie. I would see it in theaters, to be clear, but like it's such a commitment to say I'm going to go to a theater for 3 hours, because you're trapped there, or you have to like leave. Like, it would be weird. Like, like this is the kind of movie I'd be perfectly willing to, if this were like say on Netflix, like I have occasionally liked a Western in the past. Let me throw it on my screen while I do other things for 3 hours, and if it grabs me, it grabs me, and if it doesn't, that's fine because I'm doing my own thing.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody on Netflix is going to pay for this, so he needed to put it. And he decided to make it a movie. It is beautiful. I think it's well worth like from the idea of like it is a visually stunning movie. It looks great. It's going to look great. Worth seeing it in theaters for that point of view. Can I tell you what the last basically 10 to 15 minutes of the movie are, Taran?
Sure.
It's a trailer for the next movie. And they do not tell you it is a trailer for the next movie. They just start doing it. And you're watching
like actual like jump cuts, like yes. It's a trailer.
Yes, it's a full-on trailer. And the point of it being like there are things that are happening that I'm like, I don't think that happened in this movie. And then suddenly you're like, oh, we're previewing the next movie that comes out in 6 weeks. My dad was also very confused at this. I was confused at this until I realized what they were doing, knowing that the next movie comes out so soon. It's so fascinating, Taran. This is one of the most interesting movie experiences I've had since talking about movies on podcasts. I will say, yeah. I compare that with the next day. I went to go see A Quiet Place day one, and I loved it. I thought it was very good. I think it's not the most amazing movie you're ever going to see, but I think it is incredibly well acted for a movie that is designed on like no talking and no dialogue. So everything has to be done with facial expressions. Lupita Nyong'o is so good. I thought Joseph Quinn is really good in this movie. So you basically put the movie on their shoulders, and I think that they nail it. I think it's a very sort of, it's interesting to sort of delve back into the Quiet Place world, which is one that I really like, but sort of take this completely different approach, which obviously the Quiet Place starts like we're on the farm. We're well into what has happened in terms of like monster. You don't want to the monsters to hear you. These people like figuring out the rules of that very quickly, navigating the world. Lupita Nyong'o's character, there's an element to her character that I didn't really see. I try not to watch a lot of trailers. Sometimes I can't help it because I go to the movies too much. But there's an aspect to her character that I think was a really interesting thing to explore in a post-apocalyptic world, which I think about sometimes as like somebody who lives with type 1 diabetes, that like I'm going to be the annoying person who's like, hey, we got to go to a pharmacy and get me some insulin. It's like the zombies are attacking. There's sort of like an element like that. I thought it looked great, and the graphics are great, and the monsters are there, and it's there's one element to the movie that involves a cat throughout the whole movie that I'm like, man, this would have gone sideways immediately. It's fine. It's sort of like, you just roll with it a little bit. This movie was filmed in a backlot in London and is supposed to be all of Manhattan. I think it's impressive. It's an impressive movie. It made about $50 million. I think almost 100 million worldwide, which is more than its budget. So I think it's doing exceptionally well, even if it didn't win the box office.
Yeah, I think it did better than the previous two Quiet Places. So like it's as a franchise, like very good result here. What's I'm not gonna see Horizon. I will see A Quiet Place day one. I really liked the first movie. I was very excited for the second one. It had Cillian Murphy. I thought the second one was fine. When I heard about this one, I was like, the premise is like, okay, day one, like we're going backwards. We're like, is it really even that interesting? Day one, like I don't know. I wasn't sure that the premise made sense to me as like an intriguing concept, but I'm happy to hear it was like perfectly watchable, and that maybe even enjoyable. So we'll see. I think the main news here is that like I think given the success of this, I think we can expect more Quiet Places.
So it will. I will say, I think the ending it will be interesting in terms of how they do that. I will not say more. I definitely think that they can do more. I wonder whether they go back to like the OG Quiet Place or just basically they'll have to do some sort of other spin-offy thing. I wonder if this is also like, okay, it did well. What's the TV show comes out of this? We'll see. 99 minutes, so it's very has a great pace to it. And then the other thing I was really intrigued by, and I think he does a great job, which is Michael Cernosky. He directs it. This is his first feature after his debut feature, which was Pig, which I'm a huge fan of. I know Josh Wigler's a huge fan of, that being the Nicolas Cage movie where his pig is kidnapped, and it's basically John Wick but with a pig. And I thought he did an exceptional job. So see what he does next. I think that's interesting that he went from an indie feature and then immediately got picked up into like a franchise movie. So yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's basically what we've got then this week. Do
you want to chat briefly about Richard Gadd? There's kind of Baby Reindeer follow-up news, which I think is very interesting.
Yes, I almost forgot. So Baby Reindeer, which I had as one of my top shows of the year, and was certainly in our top 5 list on the premiere of this podcast, was created by Richard Gadd, who had actually sold a show to the BBC prior to Baby Reindeer like blasting off into the stratosphere. It's called Lions. But now that Baby Reindeer has done so well and he's garnered so much attention, HBO reached out and was like, hey, can we get in on this? Can we partner with you to make this show? And he was like very excited to do so. So he now has a deal with HBO. They will be partnering with the BBC, which is something that they've done plenty of times in the past with various shows. And this new show will be entering production relatively soon, I think.
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing about this show is that, so first of all, I think it's interesting that I think it's very funny that Netflix is being sued for $170 million. Then he's like, I gotta go. Actually, go over to HBO.
Thing, right? So this was what was talked about, is that like normally if you have a deal with Netflix and like your show makes it big, like they're gonna want to get their hands in your pie when you do something else. But because he had sold this show prior to Baby Reindeer, I almost said Reindeer Games, taking off. He's basically free to kind of go wherever he wants. And so it is very funny that like they are currently dealing with the aftermath of Baby Reindeer while he gets to be like, oh, HBO. It's very much like the meme of like he's looking back at HBO.
Yeah. Not that he won't be involved in that whole thing, but it is very funny that he's like not sticking in the Netflix camp to a degree and making their next show there. Although I presume they would have had the opportunity to potentially work with BBC. I think there's been a few. I think Peaky Blinders is a show that is a BBC Netflix production, so it's not like they don't have history. I believe HBO and BBC does this a lot, where they will basically partner with an American company to facilitate the American distribution of the show. So not uncommon that this
I think
this happens this way.
His Dark Materials, I believe, was a collaboration between the two of them.
So so the Lions will go to HBO. I think interestingly, he is seemingly only an executive producer on this show. So not clear how much he is. I don't think he'll be starring in it at all, which was obviously one of the pieces of Baby Reindeer, that it was his personal story. And then he put himself as the lead in that. Presumably he would write some of this, but
yeah,
no idea if that's happening as well.
I believe he's attached as the writer as well. So like it is a story, which I think is probably the most important. I did really like his performance as himself. But yeah, I think the writing is probably the important bit here. So I mean, I'd be excited to see what this show is and how.
Yeah, and there are people who every once in a while, like, create something. I felt this way certainly about Issa Lopez, who did True Detective Night Country, and I was like, I'm so excited to see what she does next. She ultimately signed back on with HBO to do another season of True Detective. This is interesting, I think, in terms of seeing what Richard Gadd can do with the show that is not about him. So Lions is about these two brothers, seemingly is sort of a time-spanny show, seemingly will span 4 decades in terms of a relationship between two people who are advertised in the synopsis as brothers in quotation marks. So whatever that means, I don't know, but I am certainly interested in terms of just Richard Gadd. I think Baby Reindeer is probably the most unique television show I watched this year, and so seeing what the person who created that show and started and wrote it does next is intriguing to me. Obviously, wouldn't be talking about it if it wasn't. But I think in the midst of Fiona Harvey suing Netflix for $170 million and then him getting picked up by HBO, I think is a fun and interesting story that one day perhaps will be a television show. Will be season 2 of Baby Reindeer.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is what we have for you then this week on the Tastemakers. Hopefully you enjoyed. We will be back next week to talk through the latest in television news and what else has been on. We'll check back in next week with Dark Matter, which ended recently, and some more some other things as we I'll try to catch up with the Bear some more and talk a bit more about that, and all the good stuff. We'll taste all the things.
If people have recommendations, I know we talked a little bit about Sweet Tooth. Sweet Tooth is recommended. I know people keep telling me about Interview with the Vampire, and I feel like it's been all over my Twitter in terms of how good it has been. At some point, we will get to that and everything else that's happening on television and at the movies.
All right. Well, yes, then make sure you're subscribed to the We Know Scripted TV feed. You can watch us on YouTube as well if you want to check us out over there. And check out the House of the Dragon coverage we've got going on and all of the other shows here on We Know Scripted TV. But in the meantime, thank you so much again for joining us this week, and we will see all of you next time.